Hello, my name is Bethany Brown. I'm here with Mary Laurel True at the Sabo Center at 624 21st Avenue South. Mary has worked here for about 20 years? 25 years. And I will be interviewing her today. The date is March 16th, 2015, and the time is 12:07. So my first question is, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Worcester, Massachusetts,
Okay.
in Central Mass, from the time I was 6 until I was 18 when I came to the Twin Cities to go to St. Catherine's University.
Oh, I also went there.
Oh, you did? Okay.
What years did you go to St. Kate's?
I went there from 77 to 1981.
And what did you study while you were there?
I studied Spanish and communications, and I actually was a student in Cuernavaca through Augsburg College through the Center for Global Education, and I studied Spanish in Sevilla, Spain too.
So your trip to Mexico was through St. Kate's or through Augsburg?
It was a Augsburg trip, but through St. Kate. So
Okay.
it was the very first year of the Augsburg Center for Global Education,
Gotcha.
in which students could, they could get credit through their own institution, but it was an Augsburg program.
So is it kind of like, I don't remember if the status of those two schools were kind of the way they are now, the associated colleges?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So tell me about your trip to Mexico
Sure.
in 79.
Well, I thought about this a lot because it had a huge impact on the rest of my life. And what happened was I was interested in Spanish, and I saw this table, and we think these tables are not that important, and like when we have them in Christensen, and someone was advertising for a trip to Mexico, and it just so happened to be Augsburg. I didn't really know much about Augsburg at all. Signed up for the trip, and I was with 16 other students from around the country, mainly Augsburg students. But so we loaded up. Augsburg had a van, and all of us got in the van, and we drove down with the director of the program, Joel Muggy, who was a professor here at Augsburg, who started the program, and his wife and their 2-year-old, and we spent the whole semester there. And it was a crazy semester because it was, 1978. It was, there was a lot going on in Latin America, but it was a life-changing experience. It was incredibly good, and that program's still in existence here at Augsburg. It's gotten really well known, and I still know a lot of the people that were on my trip, and it was just. And I learned a lot about Augsburg. I learned about its commitment to experiential education, which I'm involved with now. And I learned how much students knew about the whole workings of the college, which the students at St. Kate's really didn't know. They didn't know the president, they didn't know the director of financial aid, and all the Augsburg students knew everyone at the college. And I learned about all the other cool things students got to do for credit. It was amazing. So. When I came back from Mexico, I spent a lot of time on the Augsburg campus and on the West Bank, because I was really interested in social justice issues, and the West Bank is much more robust for issues going on than the area around St. Kate's. And so I got to know the North Country Co-op was here. I lived with some friends in a house. A lot of the houses all of them are no longer here, and including this. These are the last two. They're going to come down in a couple months. So
was that with the North Country Co-op, and were these two houses in that vicinity?
Yeah. Well, the co-op was right where the library is. Well, actually, OGC is on the corner of 22nd.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it started there, and. It was the first location of the co-op. That's the mother of all the other co-ops in the Twin Cities too, North Country, and so it was on the Augsburg campus for years. We owned the building, and so a lot of students would go there, and it was really great to be here in the late 70s, early 80s.
Why did they decide to tear that building down, or any of the other buildings? I mean, just
all the houses,
the college?
Yeah, a lot of the houses were in disrepair because students could live in them. Like you could, it was like Anderson. That's why they modeled Anderson the way it is now in townhouse model, because like 8 or 15 students would say, let's get a house, and they'd get a house and they'd have the greatest parties and trash the houses. And so I went to great parties here, even though I was a St. Kate's student. And so I got to know the Seward neighborhood too, and around that time the Seward Co-op was coming, and I worked there. And then I actually had a boyfriend from Augsburg, so there was a house right out, it was called Kai House, and a lot of guys, all the guys, crazy guys lived there. And so they had like stolen the pictures from the pictures that are now in the, I think they're in the Marshall room, but we used to have all the Augsburg presidents in the frames. They stole like some of those and put them up in this room. They had this rubber couch up there, and it was just like insane. Throwing garbage out the second story window into the dumpsters. I mean, it was fun times around here. And then eventually each one of those houses was just in so much disrepair, it couldn't be fixed. And little by little they came down. But that was sad. Yeah, it's funny too because there was a house called the Jane Addams house, which
sounds familiar.
Yeah, it was on the corner down over here, and Jane Addams, is the President Pribenau's the focus of his dissertation. A lot of his work is on Jane Addams. It's kind of ironic that house existed. Now it doesn't. But anyway,
that sounds like you had a lot of fun here.
I did, and I had a lot of fun in all the West Bank bars too, because there was so much good music. Mainly, it wasn't the drinking; it was more. And there was a little bar right here. If you go to Jimmy John's and take a left going toward downtown, there was a little bar called Culler's, and there was a woman named Ma Culler who owned it, and all the Augsburg students knew her, and she was like their mother, and they loved her, Ma Culler. Yeah, and
did you guys call her that?
Yeah, yeah, they did. Everyone did, and people played pool, and it was a 3-2 joint. So, but people used to crawl home from Culler's, because it was so close to campus. But it had like old wainscoting. It was a really cool bar, and that was torn down probably in the mid '80s, maybe. Wow. Yeah, and then Willie Murphy, the great jazz and blues musician, who started with Bonnie Raitt years ago. He was on her first album. He lived next door to Culler's in this really entangled. It was like it was like the woods practically, right next door. So there were a lot of characters, a lot of counterculture and West Bank hippies, and still some of those people exist, but it was, so.
It seems like it's definitely not died down a little bit.
Yeah.
From where, but, it's, maybe those people have gotten older and things have like simmered down.
Yeah.
And plus
you can still see them in Palmer's and,
yes.
Yeah, mainly Palmer's is the one you could still see.
Like people. The One Haven.
Yeah.
Left over.
The Nomad, but not as much. And then 400 closed, and the Viking was the best, though.
Yeah, that's been closed for a while.
Actually, it was an Augsburg student whose parents owned that, because I was doing an Augsem tour one time of the neighborhood, and I was talking about the Viking and how I was there on the night it closed and everything, and one of the students piped up and she said, my parents own that bar. And I knew her parents too, from going to the Liquor Pigs there on Friday nights. So
that sounds fun. I wish I was alive.
Yeah,
at that point.
I know.
And of age.
Yeah, right.
Really wonderful.
Yeah.
So after you graduated in 81, how did you kind of make the transition to getting involved in Augsburg's their service learning program? Or was that something that already existed, because it sounded like it was with your Mexico trip? So how did you become involved in that?
Well, actually, in the late 70s, early 80s, the internship and cooperative education program existed under the direction of Gary Hesser, the great sociologist who is also just retired. So when I left St. Catherine's, because I was still a St. Kate's student, even though I had taken a lot of classes here, in fact, I took a course with Don Gustafson, the historian here, and on India, and it was an interim course, and it was so great. But so when I came back years later, it was just funny to see him and talk with him again. And he just retired. But anyway, so I left St. Kate's, and I immediately went to the Minnesota Cuban Refugee Committee in 81, and that was West St. Paul. And it was at the time that Cuban refugees were coming. They called Marielitos, were the Mariel boat lift in the early 80s. And one of my professors was on the board, and he said, this would be a good job for you. And so it was crazy because I was translating for, new Cuban arrivals in like the immigration, the courts, people having babies. I didn't have a car. I lived in Uptown at the time, and I took the bus. It took an hour and a half to get to West St. Paul. And then I worked in the basement of this church. And I did that for several years. And then I left in 83 and went back to Massachusetts. And I at the time, I didn't think I was coming back to Minnesota. I thought I was going home. So I went back to Massachusetts, and I stayed there for 6 years, and I got married, and I had a baby, and my husband, who's now my ex-husband, decided to wanted to go to chiropractic school. And there were only about 10 schools in the country, and one of them was here in Minnesota. And he was a Midwesterner too, and he said, let's go to Minnesota. And I said, great, and it seemed like it was a lifetime ago that I had been here in Minnesota, because it was 6 years, but it seemed like it was forever, because I had a whole life in between, and when you're 23 years old, it is part, 30, it's like a huge part of your life.
It is.
Yeah. So anyway, we landed back here in 1989, and I saw this, so my husband was in chiropractic school. I had a 2.5-month-old baby, and we had no money, of course. Still don't. But anyway, we didn't have it. So I was like, well, Mary, you have to work, because of course. And so I was looking for a job, and I just happened to open the newspaper one day. I feel like it's divine intervention, because I opened the newspaper and it said Augsburg College, and I was like, I love Augsburg. I had such fond memories. I was living in way south Minneapolis, down by 49th and Bryant.
Oh,
and
that's great.
Yeah. And because we had to be close to Bloomington, because that's where the chiropractic school was. So it was January of 1990, and I saw this job, and it said Coordinator of Community Service Learning. And I said, what in the world is service learning? I'd never heard the term. It was a new term at that time. And it said, the skills it was. And in the meantime, I forgot to say that I went to graduate school in Connecticut. So when I was in Massachusetts, I went and got an MSW in community organizing. When I came back, and I had worked at UMass Medical School with residents, trying to get them involved with the community. So it really was service learning. I didn't know the term then, but the idea was get these future doctors to understand the homeless community, because that was around the time when homelessness was becoming more and more prevalent because of federal laws and federal housing decisions.
Yeah.
And so there were all these people in the streets, and all these homeless shelters were being developed. And so UMass students that were medical residents, I was setting up clinics in the shelters. And they were getting involved. So I was working part-time for the medical school and part-time for the shelters, kind of making this opportunity available for students. And so when I got here and I saw this position, I didn't know what service learning was, but I did know that the kinds of things they were asking for, I had done, and I was excited about Augsburg. I was excited that, that it was here in the West Bank. And so I applied, and I didn't hear, I don't know if I got a rejection letter, but I didn't hear. And so I thought, well, I was sad. And then one night at like 10:30 at night, Gary Hesser calls me up, and he says, hey, can you come in for an interview tomorrow? And I said, sure, yeah, I'd love to. And so I came in the next day, and I guess what had happened is the person they had wanted to hire had a PhD, and she ended up going to the education department. She's no longer here, but to be in the education department, then the position was open again. And so, like, people that were, like, Nancy Gibeau, the director of counseling and health promotion, was on my hiring committee. Pastor Dave Wold, who just retired, was on the committee. Who else was? Gary, of course, was on that committee. There were 2 students that started the LINC, the Student Community Service Organization, and that doesn't exist anymore. hopefully will be revived again. But so there's a big, huge team of people, and they liked, I think what they liked was they liked that I had been in Augsburg, connected with Augsburg.
Yeah.
And anyone who goes through that CGE program is going to know a lot about justice issues and really be savvy about what Augsburg's up to. So that, and then the MSW was important. I had done the community organizing, and this position was a lot about community organizing. So anyway, that's I was hired, and the rest is history, as they say.
Yeah.
Yeah. So so that was January of 1990, and I've been here since then. So that's about 25
January
years.
is when you got hired here.
Mm-hmm. January 22nd, I think it was.
Could you describe community service learning a little bit?
Sure.
In general, what that looks like?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So
It's probably a very large term to kind of
it is. That's
cover.
true. No, it is. So in the mid 80s, I think I'm correct in saying this, the term came into being because people had done a lot of work, and especially Augsburg was already good at experiential education. So this idea of learning from experience, of engaging and then reflecting on being engaged in the world. And so, we had a pretty sophisticated system of co-op ed, which involves work related to what you're interested in. That term isn't used as much anymore. And then internships, because of Gary, and Lois Olson was a really important person too. She just retired. She was here for over 25 years doing internships. And so the idea that you could integrate these mini experiential components, or that it wouldn't have to be many, but in courses, in course embedded service learning. So the idea is that my task was to work with faculty to figure out what they were teaching and then help them do something related to that has to do with the community. And so what my task was to find out, first of all, to figure out what was going on here at Augsburg already. Mm-hmm. There was a strong student movement. They were working a lot with Our Savior Shelter and with some other groups here in the neighborhood, and then figure out what was going on in the community and bring those two things together, and then bring them together through courses and faculty, not outside students doing things outside of the classroom. And so that was my task. And because Gary was here, and he was also really connected with the National Society for Experiential Education, which was the national organization that was really knowledgeable about this field and a kind of cutting edge around the country, what people were doing. And Gary was connected with a lot of faculty and a lot of the gurus in the field. Very quickly we were able to jump on board with service learning nationally, and we had some of the first conferences in Minnesota related to service learning. We had some really good faculty that started doing this. Well, Gary was one of them, then Norm Ferguson in psychology, Cass Douglas in English. Let's see, who were some of the other early pioneers?
Was it mostly people in the humanities that kind of
and social work, but quickly we got Bob Stack and music. We got a lot of good people involved, and then I was involved with the student group, the Link. I was involved with the faculty, and then I kind of, being a community organizer, I got involved in all kinds of things related to the college, and the community, because I really had to get engaged. And at that time, the Somali community wasn't here. The Somali community is so prevalent, but it was really an immigrant neighborhood, but it was mainly the Vietnamese and East Asian community, and of course the Native American community was here at the time. We were working with the Native American community, with the Latino community, and worked always with the Brian Coyle Community Center. They've been our partner for actually over 100 years with
Where is
Augsburg.
that community center located?
It's here in Cedar Riverside, and it's if you go on Riverside, and then that continues into 4th Street, which is where Mixed Blood is, and then you turn the corner, it's right there on the right-hand side. And so it actually, at the time, that wasn't even, that building hadn't been built. It was called the Curry Center, and it was part of Pillsbury United Communities and Pill House was the first settlement house here in the Twin Cities, and that was here in Cedar Riverside. And so it was I don't know when it was changed to Curry House, but it was changed to Brian Coyle, named after a city councilor who actually died of AIDS, and was really well loved by this community, and so they named that neighborhood center after him. And so we were working with Our Savior Shelter because it had the Lutheran connection, and it's located in Phillips on Chicago and 22nd. We were working always with Trinity Congregation because they're right here on 20th and Riverside, and actually Trinity brought Augsburg College to Minneapolis over 125, maybe 130 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, and so we worked a lot with Trinity, and I should look up all the list of the places we were, but we worked with pretty much anyone who wanted to work with us in the neighborhood, and slowly developed these deep, long-lasting relationships. We started City Service Day, so I started working with neighborhood organizations around that, and started the Halloween Safe Block in the early 90s, and a lot of these things got started and still are part of what we do today.
So, just listening to how you talk about Augsburg relationship to the community back then, it seems like it was pretty strong. Would you say, even before you started working here?
It was getting stronger. You know, when I was here in the late 70s, there were a lot of, organizers because of the Riverside Plaza and the urban redevelopment, that idea, and a lot of counterculture hippies and people who were frustrated with the way things were going in this neighborhood, and that the city was, kind of trying to take over and redo things and tear a lot of housing down and build that Riverside Plaza was supposed to be 5 times the size it is right now. And so there were a lot of activists that were trying to make change, and they were really frustrated with Augsburg because of all of the dilapidated housing we owned, and because we were taking we kept taking houses or buying them and then taking over, and then students trashing them and being really rowdy in the neighborhood, and then saying we were a slumlord and stuff like that. So there was a lot of that going on.
Sounds like a lot of tension.
Yeah, it did feel like tension, but I'm sure, Gary always lived in Seward, and so he was working on a lot of good community things at the time, and so were other people. But I think it's, as Gary, there's a great chapter in a book called Standing on the Shoulders of Giants that you could probably see if you want to, that Gary wrote about Augsburg's history of experiential education, which really started in the 60s. It really ramped up, I should say, in the 60s, but most of that work is done on the north side of Minneapolis, and that's really interesting history in and of itself. But in this neighborhood, I would say there were good internships and things going on with internships in co-op ed, but it started getting better, I would say, in the mid-'80s, and then after that, I feel like it just keeps getting deeper and better. So,
do you feel like there's one side, which is the college's view of the community, and then there's the community's view of the college. Do you feel like at this point there's mutual positivity, or is it well balanced, I guess?
That's a really good question. Yeah. It depends on who you ask, I think, some examples I could give of the ways that, I really feel like we have this, I like to think of it as this really long-standing, reciprocal, grassroots and committed way that we're involved in the neighborhood. One example is just, last year when that building burnt down on January 1st and 3 people died, and the mosque was damaged, Darul Hijra Mosque, which is one of the most important mosques in the neighborhood.
And that's right next to Palmer's.
We rent the space in the basement of Trinity that was the old St. Martin's table, And so the mosque has its offices there. We just said, we want to share with you because, you've suffered this loss and you need space in the neighborhood. So there's that. We have the after-school tutoring program at Trinity that is a majority of the students there are students along with the youth students, but so kids in the neighborhood are tutored there every day. The Mid-Nemo project at the Cedar, which is this great project of bringing back Somali music from all around the world to people here in their neighborhood who live here. The work going on at Coyle, we helped to start the Sisterhood of the Traveling Scarf, which is the new thrift store.
I saw that across the street.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah,
I haven't been in there yet. I've been meaning to.
Yeah, it's fantastic. In fact, I have a car full of stuff for them right now. Literally, I can't even practically see out the windows because a friend of mine just unloaded a bunch of stuff. But for instance, with that, just to give one example, the MBA students wrote the business plan to get that to get that business going. We have an intern over there who's a Great Lakes intern who started a thrift store in St. Paul when she was 16, and she's a business management major. Stella Richardson, she's over there working. We have an alum who's the business manager for the Sisterhood now, Yasameen Shadidi. She's fantastic. I helped, and the president helped to find that building and get that building for the Sisterhood. From Faith in the City, this tour we were doing, and the president initiated this of a lot of the Lutheran leaders, and it just so happened that the CEO of Fairview was on the tour, and I said, I need a building for the Sisterhood, because it was in the African Development Center down here, and it was tiny, and so a couple days later, the CEO of Fairview called the President Privenow, and said, you can have that building.
Nice.
Yeah, I know. So, it's just all these ways that we...
Yeah.
And then Steve Peacock, who's the director of community relations here, has done a lot of amazing work with the, the West Bank Business Association, the West Bank Community Coalition. The President Privenow is the chair of the Cedar Riverside Partnership. It's just, we're just, in deep. And I think because there are people that have been here for, a quarter of a century, like me and Gary, who really, and other people and we have the campus kitchen too, that the campus kitchen serves a meal at Coyle 4 days a week and in the evenings.
Is that all volunteer based, the way it's run?
Yeah, it's all of our food in the cafeteria that doesn't get eaten.
Wow.
Yeah, and Allison Green, whose office is right over here, is the director of that, and so we serve at least 1,200 meals a month from food that would have gotten dumped from the cafeteria.
That's really awesome.
It's
not just, on so many levels.
Yeah.
Because you're being resourceful, you're not letting things go to waste, so you're preventing food waste, you're helping people that maybe would otherwise not have any food, and you're building relationships with those people. So.
Yeah. So we serve at Peace House over on Franklin near the Electric Fetus. We serve Ebenezer Towers, which is for seniors, and they didn't have any congregate dining. They never had a meal together, all those, and they're isolated seniors until Friday nights now. A meal's served every week, and our students are there. So I think that's been a great contribution, because also Allison's job as the director of Campus Kitchen is to be in charge of this community garden. That was started with 80 plots, and that's for the neighborhood. There's a lot of neighborhood gardeners. There's not a lot of green space in this neighborhood, and so we have that. And then we have a gleaning project through the Campus Kitchen that students saved 38,000 pounds of produce that would have gone from farmers markets, gotten dumped, that they brought to food shelves and other places. So, yeah, it's incredible. I'm just always amazed, and I'm not surprised, but I'm amazed at the work that gets done through this place, the Health Commons.
My next question is going to kind of examine how you would do something like this elsewhere. Because specifically I'm thinking about your time at St. Kate's and what you think it would be like to try and establish this kind of a system between a college and its community, and whether you think that is viable at another school. Like, you know, I look at St. Kate's and I'm like, it's not as diverse of a community, so maybe there's not as much of a need there, but for other schools, do you feel like you guys serve as a model? And do you think that, you know, setting up this kind of a relationship with your community is possible elsewhere?
Actually, I have to say St. Kate's came onto the scene a lot later than we did, but they are doing amazing work with under the direction of Martha Malinsky. They have, I think it's interesting how different, how similar in our approaches we are. I mean, we're doing similar kinds of things, but they have a very sophisticated system. They're as far as how they work with partners and things like that, I would say. It's less grassroots and it's less neighborhood based because that neighborhood, like you said, but each institution takes on this work in different ways, and I think St. Kate's is one of the best, I have to say. Yeah. So, but they, you know, it is different, and they're not based in a neighborhood like we are, and I think that has a lot to do with how we do our work, because also it's such an immigrant neighborhood. Some schools are able to work with more organizations that are very established and have volunteer coordinators and have all the, you know, everything in place. And in our neighborhood, we're dealing much more with building or, you know, working with organizations to build their organization and don't have all this, you know, capacity with all these fancy volunteer coordinators in places that have, you know, and so we're doing things much more directly, I think. Like I'd say, you know, like we're on committees to organize Women's Night Out at the neighborhood center. I'm on that committee. I mean, and I'm not saying other people don't do that, but I think it takes on the flavor of Augsburg, which is very informal and very grassroots, and I love that about this place. And then other places are very sophisticated in their websites and their, you know, how they do things, and that's another way to do things that is good. But
it's a different strength.
Yeah, it's a different strength, and so, but I do think we have what we have to offer is a whole institution that gets around this. Some people have offices that do that, you know, specific offices that's their job, because of President Pribanow's interests and because of his attention to community. We do it at all levels, I would say. You know what I mean? And we have. Someone did a report, actually, Dr. Andy Furco over at the U, who's a guru in this field. He had his graduate students do this whole huge project on analyzing different offices of community engagement around the Twin Cities, and the students came up with in the end that Augsburg lets 1,000 flowers bloom, that whole idea, and it's like we're all over the place and we have a million different things going on, and sometimes that's good and sometimes it isn't. But, you know, I think because we allow, like for instance, we brought the Urban Debate League here, we brought the Center for Democracy and Citizenship here that does this, related but other work. We brought, the Center for Global Ed, and so we have so many different layers, and it's the continuum and also the breadth and the depth of this work is what's, I think, really powerful. So from the time students get here to do SOAR, they're grouped by neighborhoods, you know, and they get to know a neighborhood in the city, and that's how their group is, the identity of that group is a neighborhood. Then they do City Service Day, the first day they get here, you know, and they're involved with the city, and we say this is how we do education, is engaged with our city and our neighborhood. Then they hopefully do Engaging Minneapolis as part of their AugSem, and then they do hopefully a service learning course, if a faculty member chooses. That's part of, for me, that's one of the issues, is that faculty and departments are able to choose whether they're going to have a service learning course or not. And I'm not saying it should be mandatory, but I'm saying we should have more courses with service learning components. And how to get that done is the question. But then students can, do a internship, a lot of times a paid internship, which is not that easy to find in a lot of places. They can do the Bonner program and get involved in the community and get paid their work-study dollars off campus. Hopefully they take advantage of HECUA, the Higher Education Consortium for Urban Affairs, which actually started at Augsburg, was one of the founding colleges. Really important experiential program based here in the Twin Cities, but it's all over the world. And then if they go through Center for Global Ed, then they really got the whole deal, you know what I mean? And I think one of the things that we need to do more of is help students understand the continuum and that all these things are available. They're all available, but a lot of times they don't see them. And it's hard to tell a student, okay, these are all the kinds of experiences you can have. But I think it adds up to this. And then there's the Augsburg experience and the engaging Minneapolis part of the curriculum. And those happen in a variety of different ways. But anyway, I think I call it the Augsburg advantage because I see, if you come in here as a first year student and you're awake to all the possibilities and you take them, it's just this incredible experiential plus good academic rigor, and the combination is just like, and also being in such a diverse community as a student, not only on campus but off campus right here. And that's why I stay here, because I love this place, and I see each year us getting more engaged, and I think it's the college of the 21st century because of the focus on diversity, the focus on experiential, the focus on working with students of color, and really having to change because of how society's changing, being forced to in many different ways. And it's not easy, and we're learning. I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm saying we're in the thick of it. But I think a lot of colleges are going to have to get to this point at some point.
They can't be in a bubble anymore.
Right.
They have to actually engage with their community on some level.
Yeah, and you can go to away to a place like St. Olaf or Gustavus and be in your little world and probably learn a lot, but I don't think you're probably ready for the for the diversity of the world and what it's going to ask of you especially if you live in an urban environment. And most people will end up in urban places. So
what do you think are some of the difficulties that you've encountered in your 25 years here?
Yeah, I would say the biggest difficulty, and continues to be, is, and I had this discussion with Professor Tim Pippert in sociology this week, and I said, Tim, what can I do, and I'm continuously trying to figure this out, what can I do to get faculty more engaged in this work? And students, but mostly faculty. He said, Mary, what they need you can't give them. And I said, wow, what's that? Time. They don't have time this takes a lot of time, even with my support, and it's a different way of teaching. So most of us were taught in a manner where the teacher stands up in the front of the room and imparts some wisdom, right? Yeah, right, exactly. And so once students are engaged with the community, they're learning from a different place, and it's an adjustment. But our faculty are very open to, I think, new methods of teaching and so forth. But it's more about it takes time to figure these things out. It takes time to integrate into your course. They're on a million different committees. They're learning to teach to different populations that they didn't, there's a whole myriad of learning styles and students whose first language wasn't English growing up, all kinds of things that make it harder to teach, I think. And they're asked to do a lot outside the classroom. And so they're also learning how to do hybrid courses, which is a whole new, so that's the hardest thing, is that students have the same issue. Students are working 20, 40 hours a week to be able to go to college. They have jobs, they have lives, outside. It used to be, I think, at least when I was in school, I didn't do much besides go to school and then, go
home and study
or party and hang out. It was this whole kind of experience of, it's a separation, 4 years of separation from the real world. That's not true anymore. And sometimes you think, oh yeah, right. They say, I'm busy, and then they'll say, well, let's get together. And students will open their calendar, and I'll look through, they'll just say, well, I have this, and then I have this. And a lot of our students also are either in music, which takes up 3 or 4 days a week, or they're in sports. We have a lot of athletes, and that takes up every day of the week, especially in season. And those seasons last 3 or 4 months. So they have internships, they have, it's, well, because you're a student, but it's like, this is amazing. So that's why I think the course in bed isn't so important. And it's hard on students in some ways, because then they have to fit it in, but instead of, it's in lieu of something else. And I always tell the faculty, you can't just plop this extra component on. It has to be in lieu of some other huge project that students are involved with the community. But
because you don't want to add more to what they're already
you want
expected to do.
Right, but you want to add something that's, what I would say, that component is life-giving. It enlivens the material, the classroom. It gets students out into the community, understanding what's going on in the world. A lot of our students are already part of the community. Like, I'm sure your life is like that. Yeah. But some people's lives, and plus, if you're going to study education, will be involved with education. If you're going to study social work, if you're going to study business, get involved with the nonprofit world around us. We have some of the most interesting entrepreneurial businesses anywhere in Minnesota, right here in the neighborhood. If you're going to be involved with science, so that's why I think it's important to do, and so do a lot of other people. Make learning relevant.
Yeah. Right?
And plus, the way the world is, and the way and how much our communities need us to understand what's going on. We can't afford just to sit in classrooms all the time. I don't think, you know what I mean? Just to sit around. And okay, so anyway, this project that you're doing is experiential. Like, you could talk about in class how to do this. It would be very different than actually what we're doing in this very moment, so.
Yeah.
It doesn't always have to be, I would say it's not always about service. Although this is a service to the college and maybe to someone in the future too, so.
I would say so.
Yeah.
And I feel like you have a lot to offer to people who want to learn about this. So.
Good.
My last question.
Yeah.
It's kind of twofold. What do you see in the future for Augsburg in this community, and where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years?
Oh, good question. Well, I see Augsburg being more and more part of the community. As far as that we can't exist without this community, and this community can't exist without us. That we're just inextricable, if that's the right word. And that we find, my hope and my dream is that we find more and more ways to engage with each other. Not in the idea that we have something to give each other. That it's not about, like, we have all the knowledge here and we're going to tell you or help you. It's more about how are we going to be together. Like this Mid-Nemo project with the Cedar Cultural Center is a good example that I don't know if you've encountered it much, but the Cedar got this grant to bring Somali music to the neighborhood because after the Civil War in '91, the musicians scattered all over the world. They didn't have their instruments. The bands broke up, and here in Minnesota, we've only had, at weddings and things, some Somali music where people are listening to tapes or lip syncing or doing. And so the idea was get these musicians from all over the world. And so the Cedar's done that, and they needed a higher ed partner in order to make it happen. And they also needed to do residencies with the musicians in classrooms. And so also Bob Stack from the jazz band director for years, who just retired,
developed
developed a band that understood the music, and now is the backup band for all these people coming that don't have any bands. They have wonderful singers and maybe some drummers and musicians, but so there's this put together and transcribed all the music from tapes, because there's no written music.
That sounds very difficult.
I know. It's going, with some of our alums are doing it too. It's just like amazing. And so now we've contributed a ton back with the community, and the students have learned about Somali music. So and as far as my own future, in 10 years, hopefully I'll be retired. Now, I won't be retired, but I'll be redirected. I'll say redirected into, and in the meantime, I'm not sure. Each year I think, is this what I want to be doing, and it is, I make a conscious decision. I don't just think, I should just hang out here.
Yeah.
I say, am I valuable here? Am I useful? And is this good for my life?
Mm-hmm.
And so far, that's what and having this new sisterhood of the traveling, because I'm a thrift fanatic, this has been a great addition to my life. And I think the life of the college and the students, and also the Cedar is what I think my favorite cultural organization in the Twin Cities.
Yeah.
And so those two things have really revved it up for me this year and last year. But there's always something coming along.
That sounds like it.
Yeah, my next project for the summer is working with the business department with Professor Mark McIntosh on figuring out how business can get more involved with the local businesses and doing financial management and stuff with people in the neighborhood. So always a new project. Yeah.
That sounds like really exciting. Like everything's always moving forward.
Yeah.
Everything's always growing, and it's always, for the most part, good.
Yeah, and consistent.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say that I think, Paul Pribanel has been a huge gift to this community and to this college in his vision of where we're going and what we're up to. And when I really think about all the different steps we've taken, it's like he's had a hand in almost every one of them. And so anyway, so I've loved this place. It's been, one of the greatest joys of my entire life is to have been here and to still be here and to be able to be a part of this, because I think this place is on fire in the best ways possible.
Yeah.
So.
Well, thank you for your time, Mary.
Sure.
Thank you for allowing me to conduct this interview.
Yeah.
And hopefully we will hear a lot more from you.
Okay, great. Thank you.